We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self-development and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number 1 in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spiegner Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. Welcome to Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host, and as always, these are my views, and this content is for educational and informational purposes only. So I'm glad you're with me. I want to begin with a question that seems simple enough, but turns out not to be. And the question is, who are you? I'm not talking philosophically. I'm talking practically. If someone asks you at a party, at a barbecue, on a plane, the answer most men reach for is their job. I'm a teacher, I'm in construction, I run a business, I work in finance. The job title comes first, often before anything else. Before father, before partner, before the things you actually care about or the kind of person you're trying to be. For most men, that's not an evasion. It's a genuine answer. The work is the identity. The two have become, somewhere along the way, the same thing. Now, today, I want to look at how that happens, what it costs, and crucially, what becomes possible when a man starts to separate who he is from what he does. Because this is, I think, one of the most central psychological challenges of male adult life. And it's one that the way we form as men almost guarantees we're not prepared for. This is also, in the arc of what we've been doing this season, the first episode that turns explicitly towards reconstruction. We've spent a lot of time on diagnosis, what's wrong, why it happens, what it costs. But today I want to begin asking what's possible instead. So let's, as always, start with what the research tells us, because the picture is striking. The AIHW data on men's health consistently shows that job loss, forced retirement, and occupational injury are among the strongest predictors of depression, anxiety, and suicide risk in adult males. Stronger than a relationship breakdown in some cohorts. Stronger than physical illness in isolation. The loss of work for many men is experienced as the loss of self. Not as a crisis that happens to them, but as an event that erases them. Beyond Blue research on male depression makes this very specific. Men whose primary source of self-worth is their occupational role show significantly elevated risks when that role is disrupted. And the Movember Foundation's work on men's wellbeing in Australia identifies retirement as a particular vulnerability that the health system is consistently underprepared for. Men who have spent 4 decades defining themselves through productive achievement reach the end of their working life and find, sometimes for the first time, there is nothing underneath it. No other structure of meaning, no other answer to the question of who they are. Now, the clinical picture that emerges in practice matches that data. Men arriving in their 50s and 60s after redundancy, after the business they built for 30 years fails or is sold, after a physical injury that ends a physically defined working life, these men are not merely dealing with a practical problem. They are dealing with an identity crisis of the first order. The scaffolding that built their selfhood around has been removed, and what's left is often terrifying in its emptiness. But the problem isn't only at the crisis point. The work trap catches men long before it springs. The man in his 30s and 40s who is working 70 hours a week, who misses his children's evenings and weekends, who is vaguely aware that he's substituting productivity for presence, he's already inside that trap. It just hasn't felt it close yet. The man box research from the Jesuit Social Services is relevant here. The norms that boys absorb about what men are for, providing, achieving, being the one who handles things, don't produce health-seeking avoidance. The man box research from Jesuit Social Services is relevant here. The norms that boys absorb about what men are for, like providing, achieving, and being the guy who handles things, don't just produce health-seeking avoidance and emotional suppression. They produce a specific template for what a man's worth consists of. And as we spoke in the Kala Yuga civilization, which we discussed last episode, the dominant answer to that question is productive output. What you make, what you earn, what your title says. The work trap is not a personal failure. It is a logical outcome of internalizing that template completely. Now, 2 of the 5 pillars of making good men great are specifically working here, and I want to name them precisely. The first is acquisition. In its material form, acquisition is about accumulating things, right? Money, property, possessions, relationships even. But acquisition also operates at that level of status and identity. The career is the primary site in which most men accumulate worth. The promotions, the titles, the salary increases, the professional reputation built over decades. These are forms of acquisition as real and as psychologically compelling as any material possession, and they carry the same structural problem. The more you accumulate, the more your self-worth depends on continued accumulation. The day the accumulation stops, whether through redundancy, retirement, illness, or failure, the entire house of cards falls. Now, the second is hierarchy. The workplace is one of the most legible hierarchical structures in adult life. Rank is visible. Progress is measurable. Authority is formally assigned. For men socialized to understand their worth through hierarchical positions, the workplace provides daily, unambiguous feedback on where they stand. It is, in a sense, the adult version of the schoolyard, a structured arena in which status is earned, displayed, and defended. The clinical consequence of this is that many men's sense of self is not just tied to their work in general, but specifically to their hierarchical position within it. A demotion, a lateral move, a restructure that diminishes formal authority, these can be experienced as existential threats, not merely professional disappointments. The masculine introject reinforces both of these mechanisms. Remember, the introject is the internalized voice of patriarchal masculinity. That set of demands that men absorb in childhood and carry forward as their own. Among the most powerful of those demands is this one. A man's worth is demonstrated through what he produces and what he achieves, not through who he is in relationship, not through the depth of his inner life, not through his capacity for care or for his presence with his kids. It's through output, through the measurable results of his efforts. That demand is so thoroughly internalized by most men that it doesn't feel like an external ideology. It feels like common sense. Of course your job matters. Of course achievement is important. Of course you should take care of your career and take it seriously. None of that's wrong. The trap is not in taking work seriously. The trap is in taking it as the primary or only container of selfhood. Because when that container breaks, and for most men at some point it does, there is nothing else to hold the self in shape. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps, made a distinction that is directly relevant here. He identified three primary sources of meaning in human life: pleasure, power, and purpose. What he called the will to meaning, the orientation towards genuine purpose. And this is the most robust of the three: purpose. Pleasure is easily disrupted by circumstances. Power, as Frankl saw with absolute clarity, can be removed in an instant. Purpose survives deprivation, illness, and loss in a way that neither pleasure nor power can. The man whose identity is entirely invested in his occupational status has built his life on the most fragile of the three foundations. Now, I want to look at the specific moments when the work trap closes, because they're more varied than we usually acknowledge. The obvious ones are redundancy and retirement. So the man who's defined himself through his career for 30 years is told his role no longer exists. The other one, he reaches the age where the role formally ends. Both of these are well-documented crisis points. So less visible, but equally important, is what I'd call the success trap. This is the man who achieves what he sets out to achieve. He builds a business. He reaches senior roles. He accumulates the wealth and finds that arrival produces not satisfaction, but emptiness. He's done everything right by the acquisition logic. He is exactly where the masculine introject told him he should want to be. And it turns out that was a destination on a map that didn't correspond to the territory of actual human flourishing. The clinical presentation here can look like depression, but it is often better understood as the collapse of a motivational system that was never capable of sustaining genuine well-being. The other one is physical injury, and this is the third crisis point that is most unlikely to be discussed. Men in physically defined occupations like construction, emergency services, agriculture, sport often carry a particular version of the worker's identity fusion in which their physical capacity is the foundation of their professional self, and with that, their personal self. An injury that ends or significantly limits that capacity isn't just a health event, it's an identity event. The AIHW data on occupational injury shows elevated mental health risks in exactly these populations. So again, the mechanism is the one we've been describing. When the primary container of identity is removed, there is nothing beneath it. And then there's the slow crisis, the one that doesn't arrive as a single event, but as a gradual accumulation of awareness. The man in his 40s who notices for the first time that the decades he's spent building his career have cost him his marriage, his relationship with his kids, his friendships, and ultimately his health. He hasn't lost his job. He's still productive. He's still achieving. But the question that arrives quietly, insistently, is what was it all for? The work has been the answer so long that now when he questions the work, he has no other answer available. This is what the book my wife and I have put together addresses, and it describes it fundamentally as the existential crisis. That time when we confront the very meaning of our life, its purpose and its value. And it's not an aberration for men who have built their identity on the work platform. It's an almost inevitable developmental event. The question is whether they enter it with any resources, like other containers of selfhood, any other sources of meaning, or whether they enter it with nothing but the rubble of the thing that's been removed. So, what can we do to address this? Now, I think we need to address the fact that a lot of answers that come up around this are generally insufficient. The usual answer is find your passion, develop hobbies, invest in relationships. That's not wrong. It's just not deep enough. The man who's spent 40 years deriving his sense of worth from professional achievement doesn't need better hobbies. It does need a fundamentally different approach. Now, that different orientation is towards the question of what he's worth and what he's for, but from a different perspective. Now, that's a different kind of work than picking up golf. Erik Erikson's developmental framework offers something more useful. In midlife, Erikson identifies the central developmental task as generativity versus stagnation. Generativity is the orientation toward contribution, toward creating or nurturing things that will outlast you, towards passing something on, toward caring for the next generation in the broadest sense. Stagnation is failure, the retreat into self-absorption, into the repetitive cycling of existing acquisitions, the inability to move beyond the self as the primary reference point. The shift from acquisition to generativity is the very developmental move that the work trap prevents. As long as a man's energy is organized around accumulation and hierarchical ascent, generativity remains structurally impossible, because generativity requires giving rather than getting, contribution rather than acquiring, and caring about outcomes beyond your own position. These are the capacities the masculine introject specifically suppresses. So what does reconstruction actually look like in practice? Not as a formula, but as a direction. It begins with a question the work trap never asks. What do I actually care about? Beneath what I've been trained to pursue. Not what produces status or income or professional recognition, but what truly matters to me in a very genuine, authentic way. This question is harder than it sounds, because for men who have been running on occupational identity for decades, the genuine answer is often not immediately accessible. It's been suppressed by the louder demands of the introject. The process of finding it often requires therapeutic help, deliberate reflection, and, importantly, some time. It also requires a different relationship to contribution. The generative man, the man who has made the developmental shift Erickson describes, derives his sense of worth not from what he accumulates, but from what he gives. His mentoring of younger people at work, his presence as a father, his investment in community, his intimacy with his partner, his craft practiced for its own sake rather than for its market value. The philosophical literature on this is substantial. Matthew Crawford's argument in Shop Class as soulcraft is that dignified, skilled work in which you can see the direct connection between your effort and a real-world outcome, is one of the most reliable sources of genuine meaning available to men. Not work for status, but work for craft. And it requires the relationships that the work trap has been crowding out. The friendships that fell away during the building years. The marriage that became a logistical partnership while intimacy recedes towards the deadbed. The children who grew up while he was building something else. These don't repair themselves automatically when the work recedes. They require active, deliberate investment. The same kind of sustained effort that men reliably bring to the professional challenges are now redirected toward relational ones. Now, last episode, we talked about dharmic practice, the deliberate cultivation of what the age suppresses. This is what it looks like at the level of the individual adult male. The cultivating of generativity over acquisition, of genuine presence over productive performance, of a selfhood that rests on who you are in relationships rather than on what your job title says you've achieved. Now, that's not a diminished version of masculinity. It's a more complete one. It has breadth and depth. The man who knows who he is when the work is gone, who has meaning that doesn't depend on hierarchical position, on status, who's genuinely known by the people he loves, he has something that the work trap man, for all his achievement, doesn't. He has a self that can survive the crisis when it comes. And for most men, eventually it does come. Don't be fooled. Now, this has been, as always, Inspire Change with Gunter. Now, as you know from previous podcasts, the next step is to shift into the Patreon exercise, which this week takes you directly into your own relationship with work and identity. It asks some questions that are worth sitting with honestly. And I'll see you there. Until next time, stay curious, stay honest, and keep doing the work. And know why you're doing it. As you can see behind me, we have our new second edition of Making Good Men Great, Surfing a New Masculinity. As I said, it's the second edition. In this instance, my wife has co-authored this with me. And just to give you a bit of background, when I first published Making Good Men Great, I wasn't sure how most guys would receive it. I mean, the title itself puts something on the table. The fact that most of us are actually good, but good actually is not the ceiling. Now, the same dynamic plays out in the workplace. In families, in friendships, patriarchal ideology can colonize almost any human activity if we're not paying attention to it. What Lauren and I are proposing here is not a dismantling of masculinity. It's a refinement of it. It's a deconstruction of patriarchy and a reconstruction of masculinity. You know, on this show, we talk a lot about living with purpose, slowing down, paying attention, and being intentional about the choices we make every day. Because when we simplify the noise around us, we can better hear what really matters. Empathy, connection, and showing up as the best version of ourselves. That's why I'm genuinely pleased to welcome our newest sponsor, Distill Union. Their philosophy aligns beautifully with what we do here. Distill Union creates slick, thoughtfully designed essentials, wallets, key organizers, phone cases, all built with a less is more approach. Their Wally wallets, Ferris key organizers, these are everyday tools that make life easier, cleaner, and calmer. In that simplicity, there's space for clarity. There's space for change. As a thank you to our Inspire Change community, they're offering 20% off any product with the promo code Inspire Change. Have a look, try them out, and see how simplifying your day can open the door to something deeper. Visit distillunion.com and enjoy 20% off any product with the promo code Inspire Change. That's distillunion.com with promo code Inspire Change to check out.
Hello to all our listeners. We thank you for tuning in and supporting positive social change, which makes you a part of Gunter's efforts in transforming not only men's lives, but lives in general. And we are grateful that you have joined us. We want to extend a huge thank you to our listeners in St. Louis for bringing Missouri to number 10 on the top 10 USA listeners list. And to our global listeners, we extend our gratitude to our listeners in Hungary for reaching number 13 on our global listeners list. Congratulations! You made it to the top listeners list. I, Devonna Prinzi, the co-executive producer, and our showrunner, Miranda Spigner-Sapone, sincerely thank you and ask that you please take the time to like, follow, subscribe, and share as your efforts make a difference to everyone here at Inspire Change with Gunter. If these stories resonate with you and you would like to engage more with Gunter and the Inspire Change team, please consider joining our Patreon community, where our members find bonus content and early access to video episodes. Membership awaits at patreon.com/Inspire Change. That's patreon.com/INSPIRECHANGE. As always, thank you to each and every one of our listeners. And most importantly, please keep inspiring positive social change.
Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.